Joining us now is One American News writer Grace Saldana to tell us about her experience with the anti-lockdown protests here in Southern California. So, Grace, we could keep showing videos and letting people know what happened there via that way, but you were actually there. So I want to ask you, what was the experience like of being at that protest?
It was really great. It was really high energy. All the protesters were very nice. They just wanted everybody to hear them out and understand why the stay-at-home order should be lifted.
And, you know, I was at one recently. I was covering it. I wasn't there participating, but I talked to some people who were there as well, and I did see a kind of common theme a little bit. A lot of conservatives, I would say, for the most part, but not strictly conservatives. There were also some more liberal-minded people, granted that we are in Southern California, who were also expressing concerns about the idea of a governor necessarily taking strict unilateral action to lock things down. But I want to speak about your experience as well. You were there, as you were saying, this past weekend. What were you doing at this protest?
I was there just talking to people and handing out pocket constitutions to everybody. I wanted everyone to have a copy of that so that they can reference their rights, know what they are, and see when they're being infringed on.
And that is a big part of this conversation, too. I understand the difficult choice that these governors have to make. On one hand, it is a public health pandemic. You have to make sure that the residents of the state are safe. But on the other hand, there's a lot of people right now going without paychecks. And I can't stress that point enough. Whenever we talk about these orders, I have to stress the idea that there are a lot of Americans right now who aren't making an income, don't know how they're paying rent next month. Some are literally going hungry, something that shouldn't have to be said in the United States. But then there's people on the other side of this argument who say that these protests, for example, aggravate the problem, only make the spread of coronavirus worse. How would you respond to those people?
Well, first off, I would tell them that the mortality rate for the coronavirus is proving to be very similar to the seasonal flu or lower. And second off, I would tell them that in order to have freedom, you have to take some sort of risk. As Thomas Jefferson would say, I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery.
And that's something that I've actually heard a lot of those individuals say at those protests as well. And I think it's worth being said. A lot of the videos that we see doesn't show people practicing social distancing, but these people who are out there aren't necessarily arguing against the science of social distancing or anything like that. In fact, when I was at the protest that I was speaking about before, there were a lot of people wearing masks, a lot of people still separating themselves from their families. In fact, it was along a road where people were spaced out a little bit, and as cars would drive by, they would honk or show the American flag out, something like that. So it's not necessarily the big type of gatherings that you'll see in other cities, for example. Is that similar to what you saw?
It's very similar to what I saw. They're not necessarily opposed to mitigating any kind of risk related to the coronavirus. They're just more so concerned about their freedoms, and they're worried about the kind of unprecedented action the government has taken to rule their lives.
Yeah, and that's something too, and it's not only about businesses when it comes to this issue too, but I've also heard people voice concerns about churches being closed. And in fact, across the country, we've heard other measures of pastors, for example, even being arrested for holding service. So I understand that there are constitutional violations when it comes to speech, the right to gather, the right to religion, as we were saying. There's multiple facets to this. So I do understand the divide when it comes to this issue. But I want to ask about why you decided to go out this past weekend and protest. Why do you think it's important to show dissent during these times?
I think it's so important to show dissent during these times because it proves to the government that, one, we're not going to let our freedoms get taken away from us without a fight, and two, in order to maintain our freedoms, we have to use them. We can't just trust the government to allow us to keep those freedoms.
I think that's well said, because I think it's always good to push back to some degree against at least decisions being made in government. We've done it multiple times on this show, for example, about the models that guide the government's decision. We want to know the numbers that are behind them. We want to know what's fueling those decisions, because as soon as you start blindly following, that's when some dangerous things start happening. So for a last message before we let you go, I know that you have a lot of stuff going on. What would you say to people who are maybe hesitant about these protests or are on the fence about this subject to begin with?
I would tell them to just think about their freedoms, think about what they want for their future. Do they want a future where we set this precedence that it's okay to just suspend our constitutional rights in times of crisis? I would encourage them to think about that heavily before going along with any narrative that the government gives us.
Yeah, and we already see those protests taking place over the weekend, growing a little bit over the weekend as well. We've seen similar things taking place across the country in Michigan, Florida, Tennessee. You can go across it. And now we're seeing some of the governors actually responding, I think, to some of those calls. We see states opening up across the country. California, and where we are right now in Southern California, the beaches are starting to open up, which is a big thing for a lot of residents down here. So I don't think that this is an issue that's going to go anywhere anytime soon. Grace Saldana, I really appreciate you coming on tonight and breaking down your experience. Thank you.
Thank you.